Hello everybody, today we're going to be talking about project assembly. A quick overview of the lesson, we're going to talk about final measuring, cutting and sanding, dry fitting, and gluing with pressure. We'll talk a little bit about glue, clamps, screws, and nails. Now the first step in our assembly process is measuring out our pieces and making sure that they are the size we have depicted them to be on our scale drawing. We want to make any final cuts to make sure that they're exactly the way we've stipulated them. Make sure all of our corners are square and everything fits together properly. Once everything is good and happy and we're happy with everything, we're going to sand all of our pieces. We're going to make sure that they are as smooth as can be at this stage, because as we put our pieces together, it's going to be increasingly difficult to sand our pieces. Because if you're like me and you have really big hands, you can't get them into all the nooks and crannies and into the corners once things are put together, and especially if they're small pieces. Now, the first step in our final assembly process is called dry fitting. It's pretty much step numero uno. We're going to start here and we're going to continue down this final assembly process. And in dry fitting, we're going to make sure that all of our pieces actually fit together and our joints look the exact way we want them to look, and our seams and grain patterns are exactly perfect. This is our last chance to fix any of our small details before we start to assemble. This is also where we want to plan our assembly process. Now when we plan, we're going to decide how we're going to put our pieces together, whether it be screws, nails, clamps, and what type of glue we're going to be using. We'll talk a little bit more about the types of glue, or the type of glue we use while we're using glue on woodworking or wood projects. But if we're going to use clamps, we've also got to make sure that they're sized properly and we're using the right clamp for the right job. And finally, we want to make sure that they are ready to go, opened, and ready to go for our assembly. We're going to talk a little bit about pressure before we get too far into the process. We use a glue in woodworking called PVA glue. PVA stands for polyvinyl acetate, and it's what we use to join two pieces of wood together. And you're going to hear me say it a lot in this presentation, you'll hear me say it a lot in the class, is this glue requires pressure to work. There are several different ways we can apply pressure, and the three we'll be using mostly in this class are clamps, nails, and screws. Now, PVA glue, also known as polyvinyl acetate, is just simple plain wood glue. I mean, if you come and ask me for PVA glue, that's great. You can also just come and ask me for wood glue. Same thing. You'll look like a genius, though, if you ask someone for polyvinyl acetate glue. But essentially, it's the same chemicals as the glue that's Elmer's school glue. It's just white glue, which means it's non-toxic and it's food safe. So we can use it on cutting boards, we can use it on our cups, our bowls, our plates, anything. We can use it and we can eat off of it. We don't have to worry about hurting our intestines or any of our insides. It's perfectly safe. PVA glue has a 10-minute work time. It's also known as a set time. 10 minutes means we have 10 minutes from the second we apply our first drop of glue to get everything clamped together and finalized so that it can start to cure. Now our cure time is 24 hours. That means once we've clamped our pieces, we do not want to touch them for at least 24 hours. And that allows the glue the maximum amount of time, or the minimum amount of time, to glue completely. We get the best bond after 24 hours. Now, going back to the pressure and the ways we apply pressure, one of the ways we apply pressure is through nails. Nails are a permanent pressure applying device. That means once we put the nails in, we never take them back out. And we never use nails without glue. Remember, nails are just there to apply pressure on the glue. And nails are sized by penny size, and penny is symbolized by a lowercase d. For example, a 3-penny nail would be represented by a 3D nail. And we can go over the penny chart on another day. We've got a little bit more time. And when we're sizing our nails, we want to make sure that the nail is approximately 3 times longer than the thickness of the top piece of wood that we're going through. Approximately 3 times longer. That ensures that we're getting the maximum amount of bang for our buck, most amount of bite, most amount of pressure when we're putting our two pieces of wood together. And something we need to keep in mind when we are applying nails is that we never want to put two nails in the same line of grain of our piece of wood, because we don't want our piece of wood to become brittle or fragile on that line of grain. It's more likely to crack and break apart on us. So we want to make sure we space everything out and never, ever, ever put two nails in the same line of grain. And after we've put our nails in, we're going to use what's called a nail set to embed the nail head into the project or into the wood so that it's below the surface of the wood so that we can't see it. We can put some wood putty on there, sand it, and it's like it never existed. Another type of pressure applying device is a screw. A screw is a semi-permanent pressure applying device, which means that we can either choose to leave it in our piece after it's set, or we can take it back out. I personally leave everything back in, I leave everything in, and I never take it out, but that's up to you. Now, when we categorize screws, we do not use a penny size like they do in nails. They are categorized by length and diameter, so like a 2-inch screw. Whenever we use a screw, we're going to drill a pilot hole that's at least 30% smaller than the diameter of the hole. And we're going to put that pilot hole into both pieces of wood. And the reason for that is because when we put a screw into a piece of wood, we're not removing any material. We're just squishing those molecules and pushing them further and further apart, which will cause them to break oftentimes. So instead of doing that, what we do is we drill a pilot hole, which is just a little bit of a hole that takes out some material, so that when we put our screw into our piece of wood, we don't crack it, we don't push as many molecules of wood out of the way. Now, when we are looking at our screws, I should say, when we look at the screw heads, there's going to be three main types of screw heads that we'll find. A Phillips head, it just looks like a little plus sign. And that's going to be your most common construction grade screw. It's going to be everywhere. You're going to see this type of screw or this screw head most. Another type of screw head is a flathead or standard, and it's just a single flat line. Most of these screws are used for decorative purposes and not for construction. And the last type is the Robertson. The Robertson screw head is just a square cutout on a screw head. And normally the screw heads are rounded, and that will help us drive the screw head into the wood as though we were using a nail set but for screws. So we're going to embed the head of the screw lower than the surface of the material so that we can cover it up and we can hide the screw. And the last type of pressure applying device is the most temporary, and it is a clamp. We'll talk more about the clamps in detail and what we can use them for on another day in another lesson. But a quick overview of them are parallel clamps, or Jorgensen clamps. Jorgensen is a manufacturer of parallel clamps, and parallel clamps are used for smaller pieces that are either stacked or intricate work. Another type of clamp is the bar clamp or beam clamp, and that's used for wide or long pieces of wood. It's going to be used for your tabletops or things that are really long, like table legs and chairs, or anything that has a long piece or a wide piece. Another type is a frame clamp. A frame clamp is what we use for picture frames or other square objects. That ensures a 90-degree angle at each corner, and that's what we would use a frame clamp for. A string clamp is the same concept and the same design, more or less, of a frame clamp, except that the angles can be whatever we set them to be. So we don't have to make a 90-degree angle at every corner. We can make a triangle or whatever we decide. And it uses a string, coincidentally. A string clamp uses a string to set the tension for the clamp. Now your final assembly, you're going to drill your pilot holes for your screws. You're going to make sure that's all ready to go. And you're going to apply a generous amount of glue onto the entire surface that is being adhered. We want to make sure that we get every speck of space covered in glue to make sure that we get the best bond possible. So once we put our glue on our pieces of wood, we're going to touch them together. We want to avoid movement as much as possible because that will separate the glue. It'll spread out the glue that we've put onto our pieces, and by doing that, we're essentially weakening our joint because we're losing that amount of glue. So after we've put our pieces together and we've lined everything up, we're going to hit one nail at a time or one screw at a time, and we're going to take our time with this. We want to make sure that we're not splitting our pieces of wood. We're making sure that everything is lining up properly and that we are exactly the way we want it. If we're going to clamp our pieces, we're going to clamp them as tight as possible. Again, pressure, pressure, pressure. Everything is about pressure. And the last little kick, if you will, is you only have 10 minutes from that first drop of glue hitting your piece of wood until you can no longer touch it. You only have 10 minutes, so make sure that you're ready and prepared to go. Now, your cure time is at least 24 hours, so once we apply the glue and we've set our clamps and we've hit our nails in, we don't want to touch our piece for 24 hours, and that ensures a really good, proper, and complete bond. Because what happens with the glue is it actually seeps into the fibers of the wood and adheres the fibers to each other. And for that to happen, it takes at least 24 hours, and it takes that pressure to squeeze that glue into the fiber. Now, once our 24 hours is up, we can take our clamps off, we can take our screws out, whatever we want to do, and we can sand all the glue stains out and get rid of any burrs that may have happened because of the clamping process, and get any final sanding out of our way, because the next step is finishing.